Coming up, will the Nets and Cam Thomas agree to a new contract? And where does CT fit into the team's long-term plans? I'll answer that after this.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I'm Erik Slater, Brooklyn Nets beat reporter for ClutchPoints.com. Thank you for making me your first listen of the day. This show is 100% free on all those great platforms. And on today's show, I'll give an update on Cam Thomas's restricted free agency, detailing what I view as the most likely resolution and where he fits into the team's long-term plans. I'll also have an update on the Nets Summer League roster and their salary cap situation. But starting off with the Cam Thomas update, we are now over a week into free agency, and there really hasn't been a peep about Cam and the Nets coming closer to agreeing to a new deal. We all know that the Nets extended Cam a qualifying offer the day before the start of free agency, making him a restricted free agency. On the other side, they did not extend qualifying offers to Day'Ron Sharpe and Zaire Williams, but swiftly re-signed them in unrestricted free agency to 2-year, $12 million contracts. So they had those deals, it seems like, with Day'Ron and Zaire negotiated beforehand. And with Cam, it really seems like a situation where they and Cam's camp are letting the free agent market play out. And thus far, it hasn't really played out to Cam's favor. I've asked around the league, and everything that I've heard is that Cam and the Nets are far apart on a deal. There really hasn't been any traction from the two sides. They haven't been close to coming to an agreement on what they feel like Cam's value is at. And that's not all that surprising based on just the restricted free agent landscape. There really isn't a restricted free agent market. When you look at these guys like Jonathan Kuminga, Quentin Grimes, Josh Giddey, none of these players have come to an agreement, and it really seems like they're holding out. And it's in a situation where the teams hold all the leverage because nobody in the NBA has cap space except for the Nets. They're the only team. So we all knew that the Nets were going into this and going to have a lot of leverage in these negotiations with Cam Thomas because they control the cap landscape. Because no other teams have cap space, the most that teams can offer Cam is the $14 million non-taxpayer mid-level exception, and a lot of the league has already used that up. And the teams that are remaining, I don't really see any of them offering Cam the full non-taxpayer mid-level exception, as I said, which is $14 million. So there doesn't really seem to be a market for Cam outside of the Nets. Like, nobody in the league has cap space. I think the only team that is going to be able to create cap space right now is the Jazz. I know they're not interested in Cam Thomas. Is anybody, swinging aside in trade for Cam Thomas? It doesn't seem like it. So the Nets are really, his only team that is going to be able to give him a significant deal. And up to this point, it doesn't seem like the two sides are close to, in agreement to where he's worth. And from things I've heard, Cam's camp was going into free agency with comparisons to contracts like Jalen Green, Jordan Poole, Emmanuel Quickley. Those are all long-term deals, 4 or 5 years in the $32 to $35 million range annually. And that's just not happening for Cam. Like, there's nowhere, it's had nowhere near close to what Cam is going to get. And it's understandable why, Cam would go into free agency and his camp would go into free agency thinking that and using that as a negotiating tool. He's produced like those guys, at least from a scoring perspective. So if they say, hey, we're, in the 4th year of the contract, we didn't really get a chance in the first 2 years. We came in, we produced at the level of these guys. Those guys are getting paid that. We think we're as good, if not better than those guys. We should be getting paid like that. And I understand that. And also, I asked Cam if he feels like at the end of the season, I asked him if he feels like he's done enough to secure a long-term role with the Nets. And he said, of course, and that he feels like the last 2 seasons when given minutes, that he's been one of the best guards in the league. So all of that would lead you to believe that he feels like he should be paid at least like those guys like Jordan Poole, Jalen Green, and Emmanuel Quickley. But we're in a new CBA now. The cap space landscape this year is completely different, as I outlined before. And another thing I'd say from the Nets perspective is if Cam's coming in and, with comparisons to Jalen Green, Jordan Poole, and Emmanuel Quickley, if I'm the Nets, I'm saying, look, those are all bad contracts. Like, those aren't contracts that I would want in my books right now. I'm not dying to give out another contract like that. So from Cam's perspective, there isn't just a lot of leverage. And when you look at the player archetype of what Cam has been up to this point in his career, which is, a really dynamic scorer, but a guy who, is far from, a pass first guy or a high level playmaker, and a guy who, frankly, up to this point has just been a bad defender. The NBA is trending a little bit away from that. There's not really a market for some of those guys. If you look at some of the things that have happened this summer, just like look at Colin Sexton, for example, a guy who's a little bit older than Cam, but has put up big numbers in his third year, averaged 24 points per game with Cleveland. I think that's around what Cam averaged this season. He just got traded for Yusuf Nurkic and a second-round pick. The Hornets actually had to throw in a second-round pick in that deal to get Colin Sexton for Yusuf Nurkic, which means that Nurkic in that deal was being valued more highly than Colin Sexton. I think that says a lot about how, Sexton was valued as an asset on a contract that is like $20 million annually. So lower than what Cam Thomas, well below what Cam Thomas was seeking. Look at other guys, more veteran guys like Jordan Clarkson. He's a guy who's put up numbers for a tanking Jazz team, from a scoring perspective. He just signed for a minimum deal. Obviously, he's much older, around 33 years old. Even look at Norm Powell. The Heat literally just got Norm Powell for nothing. And he's coming off a season where he had a career best year last year, played really good. But, a smaller guy who's a scoring type guy, I think a better off-ball shooter. Cam's been a good off-ball shooter, but Norm Powell's played a little bit more off-ball throughout his career. There are some defensive concerns, obviously, there. And the Heat just got him for Kevin Love and Kyle Anderson and a second-round pick. So literally pretty much got him for free. And I think, some of that has to do with the extension that Norm Powell wants at his age. But just my point being, first, I don't think a team like the Nets is eager to give out a contract like the Jalen Green contract or Jordan Poole or Emmanuel Quickley or some of those deals that Cam Thomas's camp might have been looking at. And then if you look at some of these other guards who are, on the trade or free agent market right now, smaller guards who, aren't defensive guys, are more like score first ball handlers, but aren't at like a star level. There's just not a market for a ton of those guys right now. So how is this going to resolve with Cam Thomas? I think there's a logical, endpoint to where these negotiations should go. And I'll tell you what that is after a quick break. But first, want to tell you about our friends over at Monarch Money. Ever wish managing money felt easier? With Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is more than a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. Guys, look, it's the summer. Maybe you're going out to eat more. Maybe you're going to a baseball game, or you're just going to a concert with friends. All that spending can add up. Monarch lets you keep track of that spending to make sure that you're meeting your financial goals. You can also track your subscriptions so you know what you're spending on a monthly basis and making sure it's within your budget. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNBA for half off your first year. Coming back from the break on today's Locked On Nets episode, talking about Cam Thomas's restricted free agency, what I view as the most likely endpoint and where he might fit into the team's long-term plans. I outlined on the prior segment why, up to this point, the Nets and Cam have not been close to an agreement on a new contract. I outlined why the restricted free agent market has really been non-existent, and by extension, Cam Thomas's market has been non-existent. So, I said the most that teams can offer him right now is the non-taxpayer mid-level exception. And the deeper we get into free agency, the number of teams that have full access to that non-taxpayer mid-level exception, which is 14 million, is shrinking. So I'm not even sure there's a team that's going to offer Cam the full non-taxpayer mid-level exception, which is 14 million per year. If I had to say right now, I'd probably say that team does not exist. So from that perspective, the Nets really don't have to offer him much more than that $14 million number if they want to keep him. But, if you lowball Cam and you kind of squeeze him there, you run the risk, obviously, of, pissing him off. He might not like that. That could strain the relationship long term. You also run the risk of if Cam really wants to get crazy, or some might not call it crazy, he could just sign the $6 million qualifying offer, which would have him on a one-year contract at $6 million, and he'd be an unrestricted free agent next summer. I don't think the Nets I don't think that's a wise move for the Nets to put Cam in a position where he's thinking about signing that qualifying offer, because I think they should be able to get him at a bargain number, which keeps him under their team control for the next 2 seasons, probably also lets them retain bird rights on him. So, if I was going to say what Cam Thomas's market is going to be at and what I think a logical contract could look like for him, I'd say something probably in the $15 to $20 million range over 2 years. I said that on a prior pod last week, updating this, and I really haven't, budged on that. The Nets don't even have to offer him that. Like, they don't have to offer him a deal in the $15 to $20 million range for multiple years, because I don't think that there's another team out there that's going to do that. But by doing that, I think the Nets keep Cam in the building. They retain him as an asset. They keep him somewhat happy, although I'm sure he was hoping for more. And it also gives them another extended runway where you have him and you can see what he is. And if he plays well and he rounds out some of those less polished aspects of his game, he could be a long-term piece for you. Or if not, he could just be, a mid-sized contract that could be used in a trade, or he could be a player who's on a short-term deal that's not that huge and it comes off your books and you're no worse off for wear. So I think if I had to guess that Cam and the Nets come to an agreement, that's probably, a short-term deal. I'd say most likely a 2-year deal, somewhere in the $15 to $20 million range, and they keep him and they give him a more extended runway to audition with the team alongside all these younger draft picks and all these guys they brought in as they try to continue to craft their long-term plans. Now, is Cam going to be happy about that? I don't think any of the restricted free agents are going to be happy about how this plays out. When you look at guys, especially like Cam Thomas, Quentin Grimes, Jonathan Kuminga, Josh Giddey, like all those guys, I just don't think that there's really a market for them, as I outlined. And I think because of that, they're all going to have to sign for deals that are well below what they were hoping for. So it might be a situation where Cam's coming into the season, he's not really feeling the love from the Nets. He's not sure, where he's valued and how he fits into their long-term plans, which probably has been the case, since he's been drafted, because we obviously know that this has been a rocky relationship, from the beginning, where Cam wasn't in the rotation. It wasn't all that surprising. And then the Nets traded KD and Kyrie. He still wasn't in the rotation that season, the second half of that season, after they traded KD and Kyrie, but they were still trying to compete for the playoffs. And since then, these last 2 seasons, he has been a focal point of the rotation. But it really, the Nets waited until they absolutely had to put him into the rotation. It would have made no sense to keep him on the bench until they did that. Even the beginning of, not this season, the beginning of last season, the 2023-24 season, there were still some rocky points in the beginning of that year. He was coming off the bench under Jock Vaughn to start the year. There was that one stretch in the first half of the season where his minutes were kind of fluctuating. Like, he had some games where he was only playing like 15 minutes a game for a stretch there in the first half of that year. So there's just been a lot of uncertainty about how the Nets value Cam Thomas. And I think that this draft and the comments that we've gotten from Sean Marks and Jordi Fernandez, I think, have really added to that uncertainty, at least from my perspective, because you look at Cam Thomas, the things that he does well and doesn't do well. We all know that he's an elite scorer. He brings that to the table. I think he's really improved in his efficiency, which has been nice to see. But the playmaking stands, has a lot of room for growth, I would say. And the defense, frankly, has been bad. And it's just really, there's really, I would say, little, I have little hope that he's going to ever be a plus defender at the NBA level. Could he maybe be a wash? Possibly, but I'm not even sure I'm that hopeful for that. So undersized guy who's as shoot first as they come, who's not really a good defender. Is that the type of player that the Nets are looking at, building around long term? When you look at what the comments that Sean Marks made after this draft, he talked about, the guys that they brought in with their 5 first-round picks, and like the buzzwords that he used were high feel, pass first, versatile, sizable, can guard multiple positions, can play multiple positions. All those things aren't really descriptors that fit Cam Thomas whatsoever. So that obviously brings into question of how the Nets are valuing Cam Thomas. And, they haven't had to give him a lot of money in this free agency because there is no market. But I think if the Nets were really high on Cam Thomas, that they would have given him, something, and there would have been an agreement where the two sides could come to some resolution, even if Cam's, unless Cam's expectations, I guess, were a little bit just unrealistic from the jump, which they might have been. But I think how Cam could fit into the Nets' long-term plans in his mind is probably different from how the Nets view him fitting into their long-term plans in their mind. If the Nets want to keep Cam Thomas, Is it going to be, a star lead guy who has the ball in his hands most of the game? I would say probably not. And that's the role that Cam Thomas wants to be in. And hey, like, I'm never going to fault him. He's an extremely confident guy. He's an extremely talented guy, like one of the most talented scorers and bucket getters that we've seen in recent Nets memory. So he's going to want that lead star role. And I understand that. He's extremely young. He's 23 years old. He could still develop these aspects of his game and become a better player. And maybe he will. So he's going to want to be in that role. But based on the past history of how the Nets have used him, based on how this free agency is playing out, based on the descriptors of what Sean Marks, the words that he used of what he was looking for in this draft and just the guys that he brought in matching that, it doesn't seem like Cam is a guy who is, fits what they're looking for in terms of being a centerpiece and a focal point. And maybe that means that they could bring him back on a smaller contract and he could still be a really valuable piece for them, but maybe not in that lead role. But I don't think that's what Cam is looking for. So if they do get him back on, say, a 2-year contract, like, which is something that I could see as very realistic, does he get to a point where, Cam, either the Nets, pivot and feel that he could be a lead guy for them and he could be, this like star level guy that they can build around long term? Or does it get to a point where Cam kind of budges and say, hey, look, there wasn't a market for me. I'm not sure there's going to be long term. I might have to change how I'm viewing this and fit into, while it's still a really important role, maybe not like that 1A, 1B type guy, a little bit more of a complementary piece. We'll see. Like, I'm not sure if either of those, things are going to happen or either of those sides are going to come to that conclusion. They very well may, but if they don't, this could be something where, Cam isn't as much of a long-term piece for them. He very well still may be, but we'll just see. There hasn't been a lot to, lend confidence or lead you to believe that Cam is a guy that's going to fit into the team's long-term plans. But there's still a lot that can change. As I said, Cam is just only 23 years old. I think that he has a long way to go in terms of his development. I think that, him changing the way he views things a little bit could help. And I also think him just getting added reps that the Nets didn't give him throughout the first 2.5 seasons of his career, I think that will really help, because Cam was behind the 8 ball a little bit because he came into a situation where the Nets were trying to contend. They didn't play him even after that. His role really wasn't solidified until Jacques Vaughn got out the door. And I thought he should have been playing earlier than that. So added reps could help Cam improve in those areas. And we'll just see as the market plays out and as these things develop on and he gets a better sense of the direction that the NBA is going, maybe that changes his mindset on certain things. But I would expect Cam to be back, but I just think that the way this free agency is playing out it's not doing anything to add confidence, that there already wasn't any confidence that Cam is a piece that the Nets are certainly, prioritizing and saying, like, this is our guy who's definitely going to fit into our long-term plan. So we'll see how it plays out, but, it's going to be interesting to say the least. Coming up after a quick break, I'm going to have a Nets Summer League roster update with an injury and also an update on where the Nets stand with their cap space. Coming out of the break, closing out today's Locked On Nets episode, have a Summer League injury update. Drake Powell, the number 22 pick in the draft, wing out of North Carolina, was ruled out for the Nets for all of Summer League due to what the Nets are calling left knee tendinopathy. So pretty much Powell said that he tweaked his knee during the pre-draft process, likely in a workout, and the Nets are holding him out of the Summer League as strictly precautionary. They emphasized that he's fine, that this is just a precautionary measure and there's no reason to risk anything and have him playing at Summer League, but he's traveling with the team to Las Vegas. He's still been participating in practices and workouts, just not going to be playing in the games. So that's, pretty disappointing because Powell was, I think, from an athleticism standpoint, was the most exciting pick of the Nets draft. And he's one of the most athletic draft picks in, Nets franchise history. A lot of people regard him as the most athletic guy in this year's draft class. So getting to see him on the floor at Summer League and get to see, some of those things that he can do athletically would have been really exciting, in addition to the things that he could potentially do as just a 3-and-D wing, shooting the ball, defending, maybe adding, some tools to his offensive tool bag that we didn't get to see at North Carolina, but we could with the change of scenery. We're just not going to see that. So it doesn't sound like it's a major injury or anything like that for Drake Powell, just a precaution. But unfortunately, Nets fans are going to have to wait a little bit longer to see him play. That won't come until the preseason and the start of the regular season. But the other 4 first-round picks for the Nets, Yegor Demon, Nolan Troy, Ben Saraf, and Danny Wolf all will be playing at Summer League. So can't be too mad if you're a Nets fan because you still got 4 first-round picks, rookie first-round picks from the same draft playing for you at Summer League, something that has never happened before in the history of the NBA. So there'll be plenty to talk about there. Last thing, we have a little bit of a cap space and salary cap update about the Nets. Keith Smith of Spotrac just put this out today, said that the Nets renounced free agent rights, so renounced cap holds for LaMarcus Aldridge, Wilson Chandler, Mike James, DeAnthony Melton, Dennis Smith Jr., and Zaire Williams. So taking all those cap holds off the books, which cap holds are, placeholders for free agents that sit on a team's salary cap sheet and eat into their cap space. By, taking all of those off the books, the Nets, Keith has them at a little over $22 million in cap space, and they still have access to the room exception, which is a free agent exception worth, I think, around $8 million. So Zaire Williams' contract is a 2-year, $12 million deal. So it's $6 million annually. So they could sign him into that room exception, which would add to their cap space. So they would have more cap space, and then they can also exceed the cap to re-sign Cam Thomas because they have their bird rights. So if they have $22 million in cap space, they can use that all to, use on other people, other salary dumps, other free agents, whatever other moves they want to use along those lines. They could also use the cap space to re-sign Zaire Williams and Cam Thomas. So it depends, I guess, on what the opportunities are going to be with that cap space. The Nets are probably still canvassing the league for salary dump opportunities. They could be looking at some guys still on the free agent market, although probably less likely. But the Nets still have a lot of financial flexibility. They still have a lot to work with here after swinging those trades for Terrence Mann and for Michael Porter Jr., also agreeing to new contracts with Day'Ron Sharpe and Zaire Williams. So plenty of flexibility left, more than any other team in the NBA. I think the only team that can come close to this is the Utah Jazz. If they renounce some of their free agents, they can open some cap space. But the Nets still have things to do. There's still moves to make. There's still a lot of business to be tended to when we talk about Cam Thomas and some of these other guys. So it's going to be exciting. I'm going to be out at Summer League, try to talk to some people there, get some more updates for you. I'll have more daily pods there. But that does it for this episode of Locked On Nets. Thank you to all of you for tuning in and supporting the show. If you do not already, make sure to subscribe to Locked On Nets on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts, whether Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Be sure to smash that like button, comment. Anything you can do to engage is much appreciated. Let me know what you think about Cam Thomas's restricted free agency. Let me know what you think he's worth. Let me know how you think he should factor into the team's long-term plans. But I'll be back tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.